Hi everyone. So this week we are going to be learning about nationalist leaders. So far we've discussed Gandhi. He was a nationalist leader. Mao Zedong was a nationalist leader. Ho Chi Minh was a nationalist leader, and Kwame Nkrumah was also a nationalist leader. So Kwame Nkrumah was born on the Gold Coast, which is now Ghana. So if you look at the date, 1972. I'm sorry, 1972 is when he dies, but um, in the 1950s, many of the countries in Africa that were colonized began to gain their independence. In the 1950s and 1960s, almost all the countries in Africa that had been colonized by Europeans are now gaining their independence. Kwame Nkrumah helps the Gold Coast become Ghana. He helps them gain their independence. And that's what this is going to be about. So we look at the early years. It says Kwame Nkrumah's father was a goldsmith and his mother a retail trader. He was baptized Roman Catholic. He spends 9 years at a Roman Catholic elementary school. After he graduates, he goes to college and he starts a career as a teacher at Roman Catholic junior schools and in the cemetery. He becomes increasingly drawn to politics. Kwame Nkrumah decided to pursue further studies in the United States. He enters Lincoln University in Philadelphia in 1935. After graduating in 1939, obtained master's degrees from Lincoln and from the University of Pennsylvania. He studied the literature of socialism, notably Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin, and of nationalism, especially Marcus Garvey, the Black American leader of the 1920s. Eventually, Nkrumah came to describe himself as a non-denominational Christian and a Marxist socialist. He left the United States in May 1945 and went to England, where he organized the Fifth Pan-African Congress in Manchester. Meanwhile, in the Gold Coast, J.B. Dickey had formed the United Gold Coast Convention to work for self-government by constitutional means. Invited to serve as the UGCC's General Secretary, Nkrumah returned home in late 1947. As General Secretary, he addressed meetings throughout the Gold Coast and began to create a mass base for the new movement. When extensive riots occurred in February 1948, the British briefly arrested Nkrumah and other leaders of the UGCC. When a split developed between the middle-class leaders of the UGCC and the more radical supporters of Nkrumah, he formed in June 1949 the New Convention People's Party, or the CPP, a mass-based party that was committed to a program of immediate self-government. In January 1950, Nkrumah initiated a campaign of positive action involving nonviolent protests, strikes, and non-cooperation with the British colonial authorities. So he's using non-cooperation, nonviolence. That sounds like someone else we've studied. Also, I want to just draw your attention to these dates. So these independence movements are becoming more serious after World War II. So many of these European countries don't have the resources or the means, the people, the money to fight over their colonies. So that's one of the reasons why many of the colonies in Africa begin to gain their independence after World War II. From prison to prime minister. In the ensuing crisis, services throughout the country were disrupted, and Nkrumah was again arrested and sentenced to 1 year's imprisonment. So the crises they're talking about are those nonviolent protests, those strikes, the non-cooperation. When the majority of the country, you saw this in India, India basically shut down, and the British had no choice but to start to negotiate with the people of India because the people of India were doing all the work. So when they refused to go to work, when they start boycotting and making their own goods, the British had to then negotiate or leave. The same kind of thing Nkrumah is trying to have happen in the Gold Coast. If we refuse to go to work, if we refuse to buy their goods, if we protest, if we strike, if we don't cooperate with them, they're going to have to do something about it. So these things are going on around the same time, just after India gains their independence. Um, but the first Gold Coast general election demonstrated the support for the CPP, and they won. He's elected to Parliament. Nkrumah is released from prison to become a leader of government business, and in 1952, Prime Minister of the Gold Coast. When the Gold Coast and the British Togoland Trust Territory became an independent state within the British Commonwealth as Ghana in March 1957, Nkrumah became the nation's first prime minister. In 1958, Nkrumah's government legalized the imprisonment without trial of those it regarded as security risks. It soon became apparent that Nkrumah's style of government was to be authoritarian. Nkrumah's popularity in the country rose, however, as new roads, schools, and health facilities were built, and as the policy of Africanization created better career opportunities for Ghanaians. So the Gold Coast and Togoland combined, they become Ghana. Nkrumah is the first prime minister of this new country. Um, Even though his policies are authoritarian, meaning he's the only person in charge, he makes all the rules, the people liked him because he's doing good things for Ghana and for the people of Ghana. So even when these African countries gained their independence, that doesn't mean that all the Europeans that were living there go home. There's still many Europeans living there. And so what he's trying to do is he's trying to make Ghanaians have an equal opportunity um, as the Europeans that live there as well. By plebiscite of by a plebiscite of 1960, Ghana became a republic and Nkrumah became its president. A plebiscite is just a group of people that directly vote on an issue. With wide legislative and executive powers under a new constitution. Nkrumah then concentrated his attention on campaigning for the political unity of Black Africa, and he began to lose touch with realities in Ghana. His administration became involved in magnificent but often ruinous development projects, so that a once prosperous country became crippled with foreign debt. His government's second development plan, announced in 1959, had to be abandoned in 1961 when the deficit in the balance of payments rose to more than $125 million. Contraction of the economy led to widespread labor unrest and to a general strike in September 1961. From that time, Nkrumah began to evolve a much more rigorous apparatus of political control and to turn increasingly to the communist countries for support. President of Ghana and afterwards. The attempted assassination of Nkrumah in August 1962, the first of several, led to his increasing seclusion from public life and to the growth of a personality cult, as well as to a massive buildup of the country's internal security forces. Early in 1964, Ghana was officially designated a one-party state, with Nkrumah as life president of both the as Nkrumah, he became the president of both the nation and the party for life. While the administration of the country passed increasingly into the hands of self-serving and corrupt party officials, Nkrumah busied himself with the ideological education of a new generation of Black African political activists. Meanwhile, the economic crisis in Ghana worsened, and shortages of foodstuffs and other goods became chronic. On February 24, 1966, while Nkrumah was visiting Beijing, the army and police in Ghana seized power. Returning to West Africa, Nkrumah found asylum in Guinea, where he spent the remainder of his life. He died of cancer in Bucharest in 1972. So basically, um, he begins to lose popularity as he tightens his control on the country. He declares himself president for life. He is not really paying attention to the economy anymore. He's more concerned with teaching the next generation of Africans to be political activists and believe what he believes. And because of those things, because the people were suffering while he's out of town, they seize power. Okay. So if you go down to the next page, this is what he looks like. I wanted to put a picture up here for you. There are 3 questions here that I want you to answer.